Yeah. All right, welcome everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Couple quick announcements. Make sure if you're here in person, if you come in, please sign the sign-in sheet that we have down here at the front. The more attendance we have at our events, the better, and the college reports that. And also, if you are online on Zoom, there is a sign-in sheet in the chat that Professor Meyer posted. So online people, please sign in that way as well. Okay, so glad to see everyone here today. Thank y'all for coming to our first Psi Beta meeting of the year, the 24-25 year. I am Dr. Hamner, and I am one of the psych advisors for Psi Beta, and I also teach on the Frisco campus here. I've been teaching in psychology for about 8 years now, but I've been at Collin for, this will be my 5th or 6th year. So I'm going to introduce Dr. McKenzie, my co-presenter, and let her introduce herself to y'all.
I'm Dr. McKenzie, and I teach sociology here. I just finished my 25th year full-time at Collin, and taught several years before that. I love psychology, I love sociology, and I love this discussion that we're going to have. So thank you for letting me be a guest today.
She didn't have a choice. So really, our talk today came out of an event that we did back in the spring between our intro classes. We did a very similar talk crossover event where we invited both of our classes that were meeting at a certain time during the spring semester. They happened to be meeting at the same time, and we did a little crossover, and we talked about more specifically things like gender and sexuality and mental health and how that looks to each of our fields. But we're not being quite that specific today. We're doing more of an overall view on just mental health in general and how each of our different disciplines and our different education and knowledge and perspectives look at different mental health issues. So this is stemming from something that we really enjoyed doing together in the spring. So we thought we'd do it for our Psi Beta meeting. Does anyone, even though this is a psych focused group, and our online people can raise your hands too if you want to, taken a sociology class before? Got 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, okay, a couple more in the back. Here, I'm gonna flip it. There's our people. Say hi, everybody. All right, let me see. Oh, we got at least one person raised their hand. One person in Miss Eve's class, Professor Eves. Okay, good. All right, so it's gonna be a little bit tricky, but I'm going to try and interact with both of y'all here and the people on Zoom. So people on Zoom, use the chat. We have Professor Meyer here to speak for you guys. What do y'all know or remember about sociology? Like overall, what is sociology? Social human interactions. Okay, anything else? A couple other people raised their hand. Is that pretty much the gist of what you were going to say? Anything specific you remember talking about?
Social institutions.
Social institutions. Okay. Yes. Culture. All right. So we check if there's anyone online saying anything.
How we act in groups.
How we act in groups. Yeah. All right. So yes, all of that is pretty true. What we're going to talk about today is those concepts as well as psychological and how they both differ and also blend together in some different ways. See if there we go. All right. So what's happening? There we go. Okay, I had it frozen. All right, so just overall broadly, as we know, psychology is focused on mostly individual differences. We look at main areas like cognition, how people think, emotion, and behaviors and actions. So focus on individual issues, but then also in certain parts of psychology, how those individual issues relate to other people and impact other people and our environments as well. But it's stemming from an individual person. And I'll let Dr. McKenzie talk about social.
Yeah, and y'all were right on with your description about sociology. We study social institutions like the family, education, the economy. Those are like social institutions. And we study social interaction and behavior in social groups. And we're interested in cultural diversity and differences and those types of topics. Things like poverty, race, social justice issues, gender inequality. Those are all areas that we study. So it's a very broad discipline. Sociologists tend to specialize in certain areas because the subject matter is so huge. I, for example, in graduate school, my area of emphasis was race and ethnic issues, was what I was interested in studying. And mental health, we tend to think of mental health as a psychological issue. We're going to show how we examine mental health issues sociologically.
So this image that you see here is actually one that when Dr. McKenzie and I were talking about this discussion for today, we drew it on a piece of paper in my office, and I was like, let's just make this look a little nicer and put it into our presentation. So this is not an official image that you will see like on the internet or something. This is just from our own discussions when we were talking about both of our fields and our education and things that we've gotten. So overall, you know, we're both looking at context. Yay, Zoom. Okay, so overall, we're both looking at the context of human behavior and mental processes, but we go about it different ways. So for psychology, we're looking at 3 areas: biology, neuroscience, development of an individual. For sociology,
we're looking at society, culture, institutions. So our focus are things outside the individual, things, social factors outside the individual that will then be affecting us as individuals.
And then if you zoom in a little bit more to more specific ideas, we do, like we said, look at relationships with other people from the individual. How does my thoughts, feelings, and behaviors affect my relationships with others and then affect their lives, and et cetera, et cetera.
And the same with sociology. We get smaller in areas of examination, and we start coming a little bit closer to psych. And then we reach a place where both of us are in terms of social psychology. We offer social psychology in sociology departments, and we offer social psychology courses in psychology departments. And they have a little bit different focus, but it's really that place where we meet, I think.
Mm-hmm. And also, you said that you talk about the self in your sociology class, and in social psychology, if you ever take that class, we have a section about the self as well. So we talk about literally the exact same things sometimes, but probably just in slightly different approaches, which is really interesting. I don't think there was anything else on our beautiful picture. I'll let you talk about this next one because it was your.
Yeah, when I was an undergrad taking a social class, someone explained it to me this way: the difference between psych and soc. I think this is a very simplistic explanation, but it makes sense. That if the apple falls off a tree too early, off an apple tree too early, the psychologist wants to get that apple and examine that individual apple and what's gone on with it. The sociologist wants to study the tree. We go straight to the tree and look at what's going on with the tree. What's wrong with the tree, and then what's not wrong with the apple. As I say that, we cross over in each other's lanes all the time too. And so we're not completely different because we're concerned about the apple, and psychologists recognize the importance of the tree. Our focus is just different. And I think it's important to understand. I always start my social classes out because I find that it's really hard for students sometimes to think about something outside the individual that affects us, especially in a culture such as ours. It's so individualistic. I am who I am because I chose to be this way. That's it. That's what influences me, right? When we find that that's not the case. And so so I remind my students in the beginning of the semester that we're in a sociology class. So when I start talking about patterns and differences and you say, oh, that's not true, it's just human nature, I'll say, okay, that's great. Talk about that in your biology class when you're talking about biological influences into behavior. But what we study are the social factors. It's not that one is true and one is not. Okay, the biological explanations of human behavior, the psychological explanations of human behavior, the sociological explanations of human behavior, they're all just pieces of the puzzle. They're all different pieces of the puzzle that come together to help us understand the complexity of being human. It's not that one is not true and the other is. We're all important to understanding.
All right, so for the purposes of a Psi Beta meeting, we are going to try and focus a little bit more specifically on mental health and how we examine and answer some different questions about people's mental health. So for psychology, we view mental health as first an individual's issue. We might ask some questions like, well, where are these symptoms, or where is this diagnosis stemming from? Where are the potential sources of whatever mental issue we're having? And then we could also ask the question like, well, how are these symptoms or this diagnosis influencing the daily life and daily functioning of the individual? So again, we're still kind of focused on one person and their life. But like we've been saying, we do at some point cross into, well, is one person's mental health then kind of spreading and affecting that person's environment and affecting their family, affecting relationships for that person? And that's where we start to kind of creep into some sociological issues. So let's take each of these and break them down a little bit more. So before we do that, what are some possible sources of mental health issues that you've talked about in your psychology classes? And you could be specific or just general. And people online, again, feel free to use the chat. Genetics, heredity. Anything else? Yes? Say it louder. Okay, your hormones, your biology. Sorry, it's been a long day. Anything else? Any other possible sources of different diagnoses?
Abuse, trauma.
Okay, trauma, things that other people have put onto an individual in one way or another. Anything in the chat? Okay. Good. Well, I'm glad that everybody touched on both nature and nurture, right? We got both of those sides, which is good. So for psychology, just a couple of examples of potential sources for different issues we might see. Developmental psych. We know things like before birth, the mother's physical and mental health can influence a child's development before they're even born. Pregnant women's psychological health may have consequences for fetal neurobehavioral development. Specifically, one example, they've shown that prenatal exposure to infection is associated with increased risk of developing schizophrenia in offspring, and that was a pretty recent finding in 2022. Yes?
Is there like a specified infection or just like infection as in like getting sick?
Yeah, I'm sure it's more specific infections. I just don't know what they actually are.
Okay.
Good question though. like a virus-based infection? Any of the other psychologists who might know a more accurate answer want to chime in? Nope. All right, we're moving on then. Any other questions so far? Flu, okay. Mm-hmm.
Would that also, like, for a vaccine, like, if you get a flu vaccine, would that count as any kind of flu?
I think when I was pregnant in the past 6 years, I was allowed to get the flu vaccine.
Yeah.
And it's not just the flu vaccine, it's the interaction of the flu vaccine interacting with the potential of developing schizophrenia. So, and it doesn't mean all children are susceptible, but any child with that genetic predisposition that the virus probably interacts with.
Vaccines are, vaccines are meant to see
Mhm.
all vaccine that is that most common is RSV. And the only thing is to expect to see like 32 to 36 weeks.
Certain stage in their pregnancy.
So it's not a lot of virus between the vaccines.
All right. Also, come on. All right, from an abnormal psych standpoint, looking at potential sources of some of these disorders, mental health diagnoses, like we mentioned, have a hereditary component. Things like depression, anxiety, OCD, bipolar disorder. It seems like the more science and technology are increasing, the more we're finding out how biological and hereditary based disorders, how many we really have. But as we also know, it's not just your biology. There's a lot of environmental factors from nurture that can lead to some diagnoses, right? Trauma-based things. PTSD is one example of that. All right, so now we're gonna, if you remember back to our triangle, we're gonna zoom in a little bit and look at what someone who's diagnosed with a disorder, how that might affect their daily life, right? The life that they live, the people they interact with, the work that they do. And we're going to expand on that a little bit more in just a minute. This was just a really interesting graphic that I found. I think it was from some national institute. I can't remember which one. But just a few stats on here, especially for those who can't read it in the back. So this is focusing on rural individuals who live in rural America and access to their care and how being diagnosed or at least having the symptoms of a mental disorder affects their lives. So among US adults in non-metropolitan areas, and this is from 2020, so still fairly recent, 21% experienced mental illness. 5% had serious thoughts of suicide, 13% experienced a substance use disorder, but it affected their lives a little bit differently because of where they lived. So only 48%, just under half of the individuals who are diagnosed with a mental illness received treatment. And then over here, 53% of rural adults say the COVID-19 pandemic affected their mental health. Like I said, this is from 2020. Compared to suburban and urban residents, rural Americans have to travel farther to get to not just a physical general physician, but someone who is knowledgeable and specializes in mental health, so a counselor, a therapist. Over here with the states, we have some highly rural states here. Texas isn't on there for some reason, but Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, many rural states have a postpartum depression rate higher than the national average of 13%, so higher than 13%. over 25 million rural Americans live in mental health professional shortage areas where there's too few providers to meet the demand. And then rural youth are at an increased risk of suicide, except for, and this is kind of interesting, highly rural areas. They have fewer youth suicide prevention services. Oh, sorry. No, I read that wrong. Highly rural areas have fewer youth prevention services. Okay, yes, that's connecting to what we saw so far on this map. All right, so what do y'all think about that? How mental health affects people's daily lives in different ways? Not just about rural individuals specifically, but.
I think it makes sense that rural, especially rural youth, because if you're in a rural area, I can't say that.
I know it's a hard.
But rural-
Rural.
Most times you'll ever have to say it.
Yeah, probably.
Because they're in that setting, it's a bit more isolating than say like a city setting. Because one, you have people around you all the time in the city, so you don't feel as lonely, and then two, there's just more resources because of that amount of people. So I think the fact that the increased risk of suicide makes a lot of sense, because when you're in a rural community, it's what it feels lonelier, and it also feels more intimate, if that makes sense, because everyone, because of not as many people, you form like a deeper connection with the people around you, and then therefore there's a chance for more stigma to surface,
Okay.
and also just the fear of like being judged on a more intimate level than you were in a city kind of situation.
Yeah, I can see all of that. So mental health in terms of it affecting people's daily lives, you know, these core ideas of connectedness, resources, they can really impact someone's success and functioning day to day, going to work, going to school, communicating with other people, you know, just the most kind of basic things can look different, not just depending on where you live, but if you have a mental illness, you're dealing with some symptoms related to a mental illness. Anyone else? Yes.
I was trying to say, it's kind of intimate, because in rural, like, areas, you know, if you're in a small town, everybody knows every business. So if you start, you know, talking about how you feel and talking about how you're gonna go visit, you know, a therapist, you know, that word is coming to the bad word, because therapist means approving. So then everyone's gonna start thinking you're crazy. And so
Word will
socially,
spread.
you won't be as, you know, you won't have as good of a social life as you would if you didn't talk to them.
Yeah, it's almost like having a small town feel is actually like a more hurtful thing in some situations. Yeah. Dichotomy. Were you gonna say something?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Statistics is also like amazing, but you can't just try to compare it to the countries which don't have psychologists at all, like mental illness is prohibited in those countries. When I think about this, I feel so sorry to people that they get and that don't even have access, like any help.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just something that really needs to.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think about the difference, and here it is at least available in some way. Even like to travel a little bit, you still be able to.
Yeah.
But like, there are countries that doesn't have it at all. That's also something that is like important to take into account. But maybe like psychologists from another country could travel to those countries.
Yeah.
Actually, like, help provide the information.
Yeah. I hear about things like, what's the organization with like Doctors Across Borders or something, or just, like health professionals going, and, there's religious-based groups like missionaries and stuff that go over and help do things. I don't know about psychological services that do that a lot. Have y'all heard of any? They should, for sure. It's an interesting idea. Is there anything in the chat, Tracy?
I just wanted to summarize what that was.
Oh, sorry, for y'all that couldn't hear online, the comment was thinking about looking at these rates, even though some of them might be surprising, at least they're here in the US and you can travel to whatever the closest city is and find support. But looking at these rates and then thinking about other areas of the world, other countries where there is no support, even if you drive, to a major city in that country, or maybe even talking about mental health is very looked down upon and almost not allowed, and thinking about what those individuals and what those rates must be like.
And those are two areas that we study in sociology also. We're coming to that place where we meet. We're very interested in the access to healthcare, and how do you increase that, and what it means in terms of inequality issues. And then we're very interested in the stigma. So that's a culturally produced, a socially constructed thing, right? The stigma associated, it's gotten better, but it's still there, associated with mental illness, and how we can address that outside the individual, like studies that look at how mental health and illness is portrayed in television or movies, right? The kind of words and language that are used to describe, and how do we make changes? Like, I know several years ago, what's the journal, AP, Associated Press, right? I know that they had some new criteria that came out for their journalists. When they're writing about a story that has something to do with mental health, there were specific words to use and not use. And if they were talking about, like a specific diagnosis, not just this person's mentally ill kind of stuff. And so those are the kinds of changes we look at, the large scale changes in society that can affect the stigma feeling that people have, or the access as an individual. Yeah.
Gosh, yeah. Every time I talk about abnormal psych in my classes, I'm like, it is not what you think it is based on the movies. What is that one that came out about with that famous actor and he was schizophrenic? Split, yes. Everyone was like, I know, it's like, it's all Halloween, right? It's all,
And every time we have, a horrible incident of gun violence, the first response in the media we hear is mental health. It's mental health. And that associated stereotypes those with mental health issues. Most violence is not committed by anyone with mental health. I've read some studies that show that even if we did away with mental illness, it would reduce our violent crime rate by 4%. Okay, so when we go to those, it seems like to be that the quick go-to, let's blame it all on people with mental health issues. So those are the kinds of issues that we're concerned about, the messages that are being sent.
all right, so the ripple effects. So now we're going to start our little bridge here really into sociology. Looking at the individual person, things that we talk a lot about in psychology, the rates of people with mental illnesses and how they're increasing, or are we just getting better at diagnosing and understanding them? Percentage of US adults with mental illness who also have substance use disorders. I'm going to move my little thing over here. Rates of cardiometabolic disease are twice as high in adults with serious mental illness. So relating mental illness with physical illness, those two things are a lot of times connected. But then if we take a look outside of the individual, let's zoom out a little bit into their environment. So their family. At least 8 million Americans provide care to an adult who has an emotional or mental illness. And those caregivers spend an average of 32 hours a week providing that unpaid care. So how does one person's illness, again, whether it's mental or physical, affect their direct family members and friends? And then zooming out again, on a community level, a small town, a city, 21% of unhoused people experience serious mental illness. That's probably something that you could probably assume or guess at, the homeless population. Depressive disorders are the #1 cause of hospitalization for people under 18 after excluding those related to pregnancy and birth. So after pregnancy and birth, depressive disorders are very high in terms of hospitalization, which costs money for the taxpayers in the city. Psychosis spectrum and mood disorders lead to nearly 600,000 hospitalizations per year, 18 to 44-year-olds. And then US veterans, it's kind of its own separate thing, but a lot of veteran services are funded through the government or different government institutions. And so how does mental illness affect those individuals? And then from sociology on an institutional level, you know, big picture, the money, the funding. Last, zoom outwards, the world. So depression is a leading cause of disability worldwide. It's not just a US problem, but we like to think of it that way a lot. Depression and anxiety disorders cost the global economy about $1 trillion each year in lost productivity. We're going to talk more about productivity, but what do y'all know about mental illness outside of the US or even outside of your community? Anything? We talked a little bit about how it's perceived in other countries.
I can talk about it like a lot.
Yes.
From the country where I'm from, we don't have any psychologists there.
Mm.
Like former USSR countries.
Okay.
Actually, most of the Asian countries which have high context culture, they have, or they are like developing countries. They don't usually put a lot of
Resources.
yeah, importance on mental illnesses.
Mm.
They just don't pay attention to that or even prohibit it. And people who have. If people have it, they don't have it.
Mm-hmm. No options.
Yeah, they can just Google the answers or watch YouTube videos.
Mm-hmm.
It's something they need.
Yeah.
A lot of people, you know, they try to ask their questions on mental level, like mental level questions from the internet.
Okay. Interesting. Anyone else?
No, like people don't go, if you go to the hospital and you tell them, I have this mental condition or I just feel bad, they will just laugh at you and send home. Like, they will not do anything.
So they might just end up on the streets, like if it's very serious, like there's nowhere for them to go. Is that kind of what you're saying? Unless their family takes care of them? Yes.
I don't know, this may be disputed, but I've heard that in third world countries, so the rate of mental illness is lower. In the United States. I don't know how to speak it.
Okay. So it could be perhaps that because of our culture and different aspects of our culture that we have higher rates, but then we deal with it better than other countries who might have lower rates, but they don't deal with it at all, kind of a thing. I'm not sure. Anyone else? Yes.
I believe an assumption, but I would say that for mental illness, I feel like a lot has a lot to do with values. So like for the people around you, you are the people around you, you know, so let's say like in a country a lot of standard values is like, well, that doesn't exist. You know, like you're not mentally ill, you know, like that kind of thing. And people brush it off and they're like, oh, I guess I don't have it. Yeah, it's just the not much access to resources or peer pressure and things like that. I think makes it harder in other countries, especially more third world.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, I'm actually from Zimbabwe, in Southern Africa, and A lot of the times that I myself struggle with anxiety, but it's not, I think someone mentioned that anxiety is like the same thing as other you just go to the top. So you can have it as your opportunity, but it is from like you think of the difficult. There's only when I find figure out, oh, okay, so this is it, and I need to stop everything like, well, we're only doing it one
Okay, so just in case the people on Zoom can't hear, there's some people here live in Frisco who are talking about their experiences living in and being from other countries. We have a formerly USSR country, we have Zimbabwe represented here, and they're saying kind of similar things where mental issues are not discussed or supported, and a lot of that might come from their cultures of just being strong and tough, and why do you have a reason to feel this way? Look at all these things that you have and you're working for. Anyone else raise their hand? Yes.
I think that maybe, I don't have any first-hand experience with this, but I have friends who have told me this, and I've seen people talk about it before, where I think a lot of immigrant families kind of have that same mindset of parents having struggled moving here or building their life up for their children, and then here in America, because mental health is more, I guess, normalized to look at when a child from an immigrant family says that they have like mental health issues. An immigrant parent might not understand because they put in a lot of work getting their family to this position. So then for a child to have like an issue for seemingly no reason, quote unquote, it's hard for them to intellectualize why they would feel like they're struggling if they haven't gone through the same struggles. And it's just like a case of perspective, I guess, because then I feel like parents, and even if it's not an immigrant parent, just like parents in general who have worked like really hard to get their family to a certain point, and sometimes have the perspective of,
Just thought the people would like to see who's talking.
sometimes have the perspective of, I don't understand why they're struggling if I struggled to put them in this good place and they're still struggling, so then it can kind of feel like a personal attack that then kind of gets into this like loop of like, you shouldn't feel this way because I wasn't allowed to feel that way. And then it kind of creates this kind of cycle of no one's allowed to have genuine, express their genuine emotions because people struggle with different things and they can't conceptualize that someone's struggle may or may not affect someone the same way it affected them.
Do you have anything to add, Dr.?
Yes, no to that. I don't think that's necessarily good. I think that's more of like a parent error type thing, where there's like a certain sense of kind of like conceptualizing it as like a sense of accountability or like shame or guilt based on like a like more so socially personal shame or guilt that has been responding negatively to their children's like expressing emotions. Because then, and it's like assigning a certain level of fault on them, for the complications that the children might be having. And I think that's like a universal thing. I think that happens with plenty of American households as well, where they can dismiss of their children because they had a difficult life growing up, or because they can't empathize with your individual perspective one way or another, or because there's a certain level of they can't acknowledge how their own behavior might have caused these sort of difficulty, because I think we, like you all see trend people online, especially talking about their personal experiences, or like if you were to attempt to talk to your parents about childhood trauma or something, they'd be like, oh, that didn't happen. I think that's really just like unfortunately, like universal thing. With people with obviously just gonna be dismissive of experiences they like that aren't growing with perception, but I think that's more like a human selfishness.
Yeah.
Of conflict than it is like, yes, there's a cultural aspect of, potentially having the different backgrounds of where there's definitely certain levels of things where you tend to be like I've lived much harder, so yes, they won't empathize with like your level of struggle because they're comparing it on a scale of things that they can relate to, which is also just something that we kind of do to be understanding as a human, but also it's conflicting as well.
Yeah, it's kind of like, well, when I was young, I walked 10 miles in the snow both ways, you know, all that stuff.
And I think that, when we think about, and I don't know the statistics on the US mental health, but that wouldn't surprise me. I think for many different reasons, and everything that I said, it still comes, I think we still come back to that stigma thing, right? It's still there. It was making me think, do y'all remember, I don't know if you watched football, but a few years ago when Dak Prescott talked openly about suffering from depression and the struggles he was having. He had lost his mother, and not too long after that, his brother committed suicide, and he was seeking help. And there was a national news sports reporter, Skip Bayless. Anyway, he came out and said that that shows how weak Dak is, and how you cannot be a quarterback of America's team and expect to have people respect you when you show how weak you are. So there's still this, and it's just the opposite, right? The strength it takes for someone to say, I'm struggling and I need help. So that stigma still exists. On the other hand, also, we have become much more open than we have in the past. So like when we look at statistics on Gen Z and their reported levels of anxiety, I mean, they're high. Is it because of, we've had some pretty hard years, we've lived through recently. Is it because of situations, or is it because that this generation is more open to say, I'm struggling with this, or I'm struggling with that? And it's hard to measure that, right? And then when you look at the US, are we more open to say that, even though recognizing the stigma is still here? Another thing we do know in terms of like social class and that sort of stuff that we touched on, or going to touch on some more, not only do we find things like not having access to healthcare affecting us, but even when you look at places and people who are doing well in a country such as ours, where there's such extreme differences between people that have a lot, even people that are doing pretty well by global standards, oftentimes we feel like we're not living up to that American dream that we're told we're supposed to have. And we showed that causes levels of stress and mental health challenges too. So it's not just being poor, but being middle class in a place where we're told all of us could be rich if we try hard enough, right? We see that causes stress too. So I think there's so many variables involved.
Everyone's correct.
Everybody's
Everyone's right. I mean, that's kind of one of the basis of today's talk is, yes, everything that you have experienced and think is probably true. It's all the same. It's just looking at it from different perspectives. All right, I'm gonna make sure that we can get through everything we have planned here. So continuing on this kind of big picture idea of societal impacts in mental illness. Mental illness, we've already mentioned this a little bit, like in terms of hospitals and taxes and things, creates enormous social and economic costs. So in 2012, expenditures for mental health care in the US cost about $83 billion. I know it's kind of cut off there, but $83 billion just for the US to try and pay for all of the mental health care that we needed. I know that was a little over 10 years ago, but the cost of treatment for mental health issues is equivalent to the cost of cancer care in the US. It's not so different. And mood disorders such as depression, sorry, I got to move my Zoom thing. Yeah, sure. Are the third most common cause of hospitalizations in the US for youth and adults 18 to 44. We saw that on the previous slide. In terms of more possible direct influences of having a mental health disorder for individuals and individual companies, People suffering from depression have higher rates of absenteeism. Some cases 3 times more sick days than non-depressed workers, and are less productive at work. Mental health issues result in an estimated $193 billion in lost earnings. So thinking about, from an individual trying to understand and diagnose and support and help them, but then how that person affects not just their family and friends or their coworkers or their community, but their country, their state, their country, and overall the world. It's all kind of connected. And that's going to lead us into more of what Dr. McKenzie studies, mental health as a social issue. So I'm going to switch out with her.
And that's when we say, yes, an individual is struggling with mental health issues, but when we start looking at things like the loss of productivity or how much it costs us, we say, this is not just an individual issue. This is a social issue. These are some questions, and there are many, but these are examples of questions that we ask in sociology. How is mental health defined and treated in society? So just that question, how do we define mental health and illness? Right? We create definite, think about things that used to be defined as mental illness, but are not now, right? Things that were in the DSM that aren't anymore, or new things we add. We're defining and deciding what we're going to call a mental illness and what we're going to not call a mental illness. Do you know anything that used to be? Yeah, there you go. Homosexuality was defined.
Sexuality is no longer a mental illness.
Yeah, right. But true, but not officially. It's not in the DSM, right? So those kinds of questions, how we socially construct that stuff. Why do some groups experience more mental health problems than others? We've touched on some of that. What are issues related to healthcare access, costs, those types of things? Let me take us back 150 years. And sociology compared to psychology is a much newer, younger discipline. And it emerged, let me give you the shortened version. I want to talk about one of the very earliest sociologists. One of the very first sociological scientific studies done was by a guy named Emil Durkheim in the 1800s. Okay? And he did a study on suicide. And he studied suicide rates in varying European countries. And he found patterns. So in sociology, when we see patterns, when it's not just individuals and it's random, when we see patterns and something's happening here more than here, then a little light bulb goes off and say, there's something social going on here, right? And so he found patterns of men died of suicide rate more than women, unmarried people more than married, Catholics more than Protestants, wealthy more than unwealthy. And then he developed a theory of social integration that showed risk in suicide based on kind of social ties we have. But the point I want to make right now is that to choose suicide to do a sociological study was very important, because what he was doing was making a place for sociology out in the academic world, because he took one of the most personal, tragic, individual choices and showed even that needed to be studied sociologically, that there were social factors that also needed to be examined. Now, this is where I think where we handle things differently in terms of our focus. Anyone who has ever had thoughts of taking their life, or if anyone ever shares with you they've had those thoughts, you don't call a sociologist. That's not what we do, right? That is a person that needs crisis intervention, right? They need counseling or some kind of medical intervention. It needs to be dealt with on an individual level, which is what psychologists and others in those fields do. But what Durkheim showed us that even something so individualistic, that there are social factors that we need to be studying and examining too. What factors may increase the likelihood that someone chooses to take their life or not? So today, who dies by suicide more, men or women? Men, overwhelmingly. And that has not changed. It has remained steady. That gap between male and female death rates by suicide has for many years has stayed about the same. And so sociologically, the questions we ask, what's going on? Why is it we see this difference between these two groups, these two categories? And then what can we do on the outside of the individual to change that?
So we're studying the same topics. We're just coming at them from different directions. Why do you think? Ben?
More lethal methods.
More lethal methods, which is true. Guns. There's a sociologist who actually is a professor of psychiatry, and at Duke, I think. Anyway, his whole area of study is on mental health and violence and access to guns. Again, he doesn't say that mentally ill people go and kill people. It's not exactly, but he doesn't talk about taking away guns either. He talks about policy, important policies on identifying those at risk to cause harm with guns and how we keep guns out of hands. And one of the points he makes when we're talking about mental health, people suffering with mental health issues who have a gun are most likely to harm themselves. So that access to firearms for those, yeah. So why else? Someone else had their hands up. What could, go ahead.
Socially constructed gender roles, like
Socially
like,
constructed.
like men are more likely to be with violence towards others, not violence to themselves. Just that stigma and reaching out.
Socially constructed gender roles. Yes, definitely. Yeah. Okay, I think that's so important because we talked about a stigma, and that stigma is even stronger on men. Because I mean, men aren't supposed to ask for help, period, right? Real man can take care of himself.
And I think we're also helping whenever who did you say- who said
Dak
that?
Prescott,
Yeah,
our quarterback.
whenever They were like, "Oh, this man who's weak because he's talking about how."
Yeah.
he's
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a really strong, big quarterback.
Exactly.
I think like healthy modes of coping are also more normalized for women than men.
Oh, good point.
So things like speaking to your friends or simply just crying and letting it out.
Yeah.
Is a lot more normalized for women. than
Very
men.
healthy
So
behaviors.
It kind of gets to a breaking
Yeah.
point. I think a lot, I don't want to say a lot faster or more intensely, but they don't have ways to manage it. They aren't taught ways to manage it as well as women are.
Exactly. Those are the kinds of things we look at. And when we think about these socially constructed gender roles, so we're saying we make these up. That means we can remake them, right? But when we do that, there's always pushback. So when Dak talks about, I'm struggling and I've asked for help, there's pushback. Act like a man, right? And so we always see that. I think we've made a lot of advancement, a lot of movement in this direction, but it's still there. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say that is true because I feel like Gen Z as a generation, we've made a lot of that everyone can talk about how they feel, and it's just like more of the perspective from the older generations where it's the social constructing gender role, whereas the older guys, they was like taught to them, you as a man, you can't do that, you can't talk about stuff.
Right.
But then the younger guys want to talk about it. And it becomes like, oh,
yeah. So our definition of strength and weakness is a little, yeah, it's a little skewed. So those exactly. So those are the things that we want to focus on, right? Those things outside the individual that can influence our individual lives and experiences. So in terms of socioeconomic status, there's research that shows it definitely matters. This study is focusing on children and teens in lower socioeconomic positions, and it shows that they suffer from mental health problems more often than their peers that are higher on that stratification system. What is it, do you think, about being lower income that may affect our mental health? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we all worry about money, right? I mean, everybody, but there can be some differences. Some people are worrying about how they keep their air conditioner on when it's 105 in Texas, or they don't have the money to pay for the uniform so they can play football at school, or yeah, so they're different kind of, but money does stresses out a lot. Yeah.
I think like the hierarchy of needs is talked about a lot in this kind of context, because if a child is struggling, like a child in a family is struggling with getting their basic needs met, like food on the table, basic housing,
Sure,
clothes, stuff like that, then they're not going to have the mental energy or focus to put into things like school or friendships or hobbies.
Definitely.
And then that in turn will affect them because then they might get bullied at school for not having any friends.
Yeah.
Or their teachers might be like, might not recognize that they're getting bad grades
Mhm.
because of home situations. So they're just like, you're just not applying yourself.
And even
to
they
go.
keep, they're not wearing the kind of
So-
sneakers that are cool, or those
Yeah.
kinds of things cause stress on kids too. Yeah.
So then it can,
Mhm.
again, it's.
Yeah. Yeah.
In the chat, it said more harassment and discrimination due to poverty.
Oh, definitely. The harassment and the discrimination. I mean, because again, in our culture, oftentimes, it's not bad enough that you're poor. We oftentimes judge people as somehow lacking in character because they have less, right? We have some ugly terminology in our language to refer to people that are lower income. So there's prejudice and discrimination associated with not having stuff that can be harmful. Yeah.
It's actually depends on the person. Is that like how strong mentally is that person? Because for example, for some students who struggle with financial difficulties, they can actually think that they need to put more effort into education, into getting education, into getting a stable job, into earning money, so they can, like, they know what is poverty and they want to change that.
And I understand that, but we would argue that's really not what the evidence shows us happen. So the idea, because that's one of the things we're told, right? We have all this inequality, and one of the things it functions to do is motivate us, right? So I'm struggling, so that, and are there individuals who do? But what we see statistically is most of us stay in a similar closed social class that we were raised in. We may go up a little or we may go down a little. Most of us do not make drastic leaps in terms of social class. It does, the numbers show us that it does seem to pass on. But then in our culture, what we do, then we blame the individual and say, you must not have worked hard enough. Are there people who don't work hard enough? Of course there are. Are there lazy people? Yes, of course there are. But when you step back sociologically, we're looking not at the individual. So an individual counselor may help an individual become more motivated, or fight off stereotypes and help convince them that they're empowered on the individual level. On the sociological level, we're looking at how the patterns again that we see, the experience that lower income people have compared to higher income people, and focus on that level. So yeah, do we have, I mean, shoot, think about people like Oprah. Oh my gosh, Oprah started with nothing, poverty, abuse, and now she's Oprah, right? She's got one name. So can that happen? Sure, it can happen. Does that typically happen? No, that does not typically happen. And so what kind of resources can we put in place that can help individuals in that situation? The kind of thing. So, gosh, and there's so, family, I'm going to move on here because I'm running out of time. So this is a interesting study that I read. Actually, Dr. Hamner found this study and it sent it to me, and it's a fascinating study that it gave low-income moms who are about to have babies unconditional cash. It was like $300 and some dollars, $303, something like that, for a month for the first year of their baby's life. They got $300 to spend however they wanted. These were low-income women. I think their annual salaries were no more than $20,000. So this was a significant percentage, $300 a month for them to get. This study, and then they had another group that got $20. Okay, they found significant difference in the brain activity of these babies after 1 year with the mothers who had $300 extra in their pocket, not even told how they could spend it. This and other studies like this show the impact, and this is where we cross over, where biology and neuroscience and psychology and sociology, where we cross over, because our experiences of the household we're living in, the family we're living in, the income level of our family is actually affecting our brain development as we grow. And these are parts of the brain activity and parts of the brain development then affect our cognitive abilities and how we perform in school. Are we smart or are we not? It affects even parts of the brain tied to decision making. But what we end up doing, we don't think about a child being raised in poverty and how that affects their brains. We see them as grown up and saying they're not real smart. They don't make good decisions. There have been other studies that show just giving good early childhood development, childhood education to kids. There was one study that it took low-income kids and gave them really good high-quality childcare for, I gotta hurry, don't I? How long do we have?
Yeah,
Okay, gave them real good high-quality childcare for 5 years, and after that, nothing. And then they measured these kids every few years until now they're grown and graduated from college and all that kind of thing. That 5-year early childhood, good quality education had a significant impact. They were more likely to graduate from high school, more likely to not get pregnant early, which was typical with this group, more likely to go to college, more likely to be healthy. So those are the patterns and that we look at. Race and mental health. This is an example tied with stigma associated. Who is seeking help? We see patterns in terms of race, of who's most likely seeking help for mental health care. And as you see here, Hispanic is much lower. White, non-Hispanic white is higher. Black and Asian are much lower. Yeah. All right. So what do we do with sociology and psychology degrees? A lot of the same stuff, especially like with bachelor's degrees. They're really good basic degrees that you can talk about the skills you've learned and understanding and working with humans. And those are skills that that you could put in any. Oh, that reminds me, I want to say something. The study I was just talking about with the kids in the brain development, the researchers that were involved in that study, one was a sociologist, there was a psychologist, there was an economist, there was a political scientist, and a neuroscientist involved in that study. So we do cross over. We do cross over. So these are just some of the different kind of careers sociologists and psychologists enter. You can go ahead, Dr. Hamner.
But like you were saying, most of these splits, if you want to even call them that, don't happen until graduate school, right? On the bachelor's level, a lot of the classes and the basic interest stuff is so similar, right? And there's a lot of similar career options you can go into, but these differences like counseling and clinical, that's where, you know, sociology and psychology really differ and split. But there's a lot of crossover with just human services and the health field, education, research. So. All right. That concludes our talk.
Thank y'all very much.
Thank y'all so much for participating, including our online people. We're going to switch real quick and start the official Psi Beta business portion. It doesn't last very long. It's only about 10 or 15 minutes. So if y'all will bear with us for just a minute, we're going to switch over.
Thank y'all for having me.
Nice.
Thank you, Dr. McKenzie.
Nice job.
Do you want to make Mahan like a co-host, I think? Matt, thank you for coming.
Is there a social psychology class here at this campus?
We only have online on this campus, I think.
Because I need like some more credits for psychology classes, and I'm like, I'm running out of classes to take on
Yeah,
this
you're
campus.
Yep. I don't know about the other campuses though. Okay, Mahan, you should be a co-host, so you should be able to share if you have a screen share or something that you want to do.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, let me turn up our volume real quick. 1 second. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our first business meeting of this fall 24. Hope you enjoyed that very beautiful and educational presentation that our dear professors gave us. Thank you very much. So welcome to Psi Beta. At Psi Beta, we have a list of advisors. This list, unfortunately, needs to be updated. But currently, our advisors are Elizabeth Hamner, Tracey Mayer, Carrie Newby, Samantha Kaiser, Sharon Eves, and Jennifer Brooks. For our officers, currently, I'm Mahan Elari, our president, and Cindy Zapata is our treasurer. And for our historian, our new officer is Ashley Mai. For Psi Beta, you don't need to be a psychology major to join. All students at Collin campuses are welcome to join Psi Beta, but specifically for memberships is for students who have completed 12 college credit hours at least, and they have maintained a 3.25 GPA or higher, and have also completed a college level psychology course with a grade of B or higher. For joining Psi Beta, you can either scan this QR code or just simply search on a browser on your phone or your laptop Psi Beta Collin Cougar Connect. And it will take you to our Cougar Connect organization website, and there will be instructions for joining as a friend of Psi Beta or becoming a member and filling out the applications. Why should you become a member? Because our Psi Beta is a chapter in the National Honor Society for Psychology. We engage in different type of activities such as our speaker events. We've had a community service programs as well, and also research. It is really good to include on your transfer and your resume that you were part of organizational activities and you were active in our activities. And also we've had in the past students who've been able to go to really good schools and achieve great things in terms of research and academic achievements that were part of Psi Beta. There is a lot more to Psi Beta as well. For example, the semesters that we do put together dog days where we bring service dogs to campus and we let students spend time with them to get some relief and decrease their stress during exam times. And also we have really great speakers and presenters for our meetings. We've had professors, therapists, community activities, and also one of our greatest ones was Dr. David Buss that visited us a couple of semesters ago. And we also have a research team, and we get to travel and go to conferences and present our research, and all expenses are paid for. Speaking of conferences, we have connections with the SWAPA conference that we actually went to last semester with our research team. And speaking of research team, under the coordination of Professor Eves, accompanied by Joseph, Cindy, and Hattie, they launched the research project as a survey, and they were able to put together a presentation. And I had the opportunity to go along with them to SWAPA and present with them, and I was able to document our travel there. And the team is still working on publication of the research. We do also do community services, and we've had partnered with Family Place Donation for donation drives in the past. For official membership, you do need to pay a one-time $50 payment. But if becoming a member is not something you're interested, but what Psi Beta got going on is interested to you, you can also become friends of Psi Beta by just simply joining the organization Cougar Connect, and you will be able to receive announcements, be able to get invited to our different activities and events. But unfortunately, you will not be able to become officers or be part of the research team. For our upcoming events, in October 10th at Plano campus, we will have a speaker talk about the political psychology of Gen Z. And after that is our meetings and speaker events will be usually once a month. So for October, November, and December, we have events set. For the ones who join Psi Beta or become members, please check your Collin email inbox for our usual announcements that we send to all our members. But if you want to receive direct announcements through text, you can text @Psi Beta CC to 81010, and it will assign you up a part of the program. And whenever we have announcements, we can send them to you directly through text. And also follow us on social media, @Psi Beta Collin on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. We've got some, we use it mainly for announcing our events, but also we've been able to document our activities and events with pictures and videos here and there. And we are planning on building up on that and doing more stuff on social media. And that's it. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Mahan. If anyone else has any questions, you can feel free to stick around and the advisors will stay on just for a couple minutes. Otherwise, thank you all very much for coming and we will talk to everyone soon.
I have a quick announcement to make.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Sharon.
I am starting a new research team this year. If you are interested in being on the research team and you are eligible to be a member of Psi Beta, then please email me today or tomorrow. Tomorrow I'm going to be sending out an email to all of those who have expressed interest so far so that we can start meeting to discuss. I put in the chat my email address. So check that out. Email me if you're interested in being part of the research team. Thank you.
Professor Brooks, did you have anything? Oh, just kidding. She's locked out. Anyone else? All right. Thanks, everybody.